Hello everyone, my name is Gabby and welcome back to another Hugtto Precure review. This time reviewing episode 4. With 2 more members to recruit, Hana suggests Kakayaki Homare, the mysterious former pro figure skater, who's become distant after an injury from a jump forced her to stop skating. As a monster attacks, they transform in front of her to fight, and Homare's desire to jump once more causes a Mirai crystal to form. But her fear stops her from being able to jump to reach it, and it disappears. As the others defeat the monster without her help, and Hamare tells them to give up on her, Hana thinks that tomorrow might be different. So, what did I like about this episode? Well, first of all, very obviously, the animation. The animation throughout this entire episode was just really high quality. Basically, every single small detail and small action within this episode felt like it was just lovingly animated, and it made things that would normally seem kind of very everyday and normal feel actually big and exhilarating and a big sort of spectacle. Everything from Hana's over-the-top expressions and reactions, to the game of basketball they play, to Homare running towards the Mirai crystal. There was just so much attention to detail and just how much animation there was. It made everything look way cooler than it normally would. And it didn't just apply to the slice of life stuff, it also applied to the fight scene. I think that moment where Hana has her final attack against the monster of the week before she purifies it, basically that entire build up to that section where she's sort of running around, dodging, jumping up on top of the monster, and then finally using her pom-poms to do like one final attack. I think that is going to go down in the history of this series as being one of those actual like iconic moments in Hugtto Precure. And it's only episode 4, and that's really cool. But the other great thing about this episode was basically just everything to do with Hamare. I mean, for one, I think Hamare is honestly a quite interesting character, and the kind of character we don't really see very often in Precure. And not just because she's a tomboy and she's also the yellow one, and that doesn't normally happen. I think what's interesting about Hamare for me is that she's kind of a delinquent. She doesn't go to school all the time. She sort of blows off the teachers who are legitimately trying to help. She kind of has this almost sort of like disrespect towards authority figures, which you don't really see for characters of this kind of show. And of course, the biggest thing and the most interesting thing is that Hamare is essentially a character in Precure whose character arc involves her essentially suffering from post-traumatic stress, in that she was this big figure skater until one time she had an accident when she tried to do a jump and it injured her leg, and even though her leg is healed now, the emotional scars from that big moment, from that traumatic moment, still haven't really healed properly. Sometimes I do have to go and step back and remember that this is still a show for little girls, and this is a surprisingly heavy subject matter, and also the fact that they're not really trying to shy away from the fact that this is a heavy subject matter. Like, they are giving it all the attention it deserves. And by that, I mean it's not being resolved within one episode. Because the biggest, most interesting thing about this episode, and I think the thing that I enjoyed the most, was the fact that at the end of the day, Homare has this desire that she wants to essentially fly again, jump again, do that kind of thing, and it makes her Mirai crystal actually show up, but at the end of the day, she's kind of still not ready yet. She's still got these emotional scars, and because of that, she doesn't get the Mirai crystal. It disappears. This is essentially a recruitment episode, but it doesn't actually end with the character being able to be recruited. And I don't think this has happened since Karen from Yes Precure 5. And also keep in mind that basically at this point happened about 10 years ago. See, what's cool about these kinds of moments is they stand out because these kinds of series are normally so formulaic. You expect that if a character is getting sort of recruited, if a character is sort of being talked about, if we find out their backstory, that they're going to become a Precure within the same episode. And here it feels like the signs are all leading up towards that happening, and it doesn't happen. And because it doesn't happen, it starts making you think about why it's not happening, and it also makes Homare as a character and also as a Precure stand out. In this episode, the Mirai crystal is right in front of Hamare, but she can't grab it because she's still terrified to jump. Essentially, Hamare can't embrace her own shining future because she's still being tied down by the past. See, this is what I love about the concept of this season. It's all just a giant metaphor, but at the same time, the whole metaphor, the whole idea of a Precure being related to the future and related to their future, it's so broad and all-encompassing that it can actually relate to a lot of different scenarios and a lot of different kind of character arcs and personalities. It might even be better than Karen's failed recruitment, because in this case, there's a legitimate reason as to why she can't get get the Mirai Crystal, a reason that's both completely literal and also completely metaphorical in a way that makes clear logical sense. As for what I didn't like about this episode, well, I must admit, having a kind of fake out that this episode did, having a character sort of fail to transform for the first time and have to sort of wait a bit and get more character development before they're actually able to do it, on the one hand I think is really great, but on the other hand I think I can sort of understand as to why they haven't done this for about 10 years in Precure. And that's because it almost feels kind of a little bit unfair. In an out-of-universe sense, it's almost kind of unfair to Hana and Saya because they only get one character-focused episode until they kind of join the team, whereas Homare is allowed to get 2, or even arguably 3, because she was also in last episode. Basically, Homare gets to have way more unique screen time than all of them, and it kind of almost makes it feel unbalanced in a way. But in a more sort of in-universe sense, it's sort of unfair to Hamare because essentially she has to be challenged before she's able to become a Precure, whereas Hana and Saya don't really, or at least not nearly as much. Hana and Saya didn't have to jump for their Mirai crystals. In fact, their Mirai crystals showed up either in a place that was clearly in arm's reach, or their Mirai crystals were lowered for them to easily grab. I know that kind of sounds like a nitpick, but that's just more an example to try and understand what I'm getting at here. Like, Hana manages to become a Precure by wanting to protect Hugtto. Saya gets to become a Precure after seeing Hana fight and realizing that she has the courage to do that as well. But for Hamare, she can only become a Precure after facing up to her own worst fears, even though she seems to have the same amount of resolve that Hana and Saya do. It's just very strange logic if you think about it. Like the fact that maybe Hana and Saya didn't have to work as hard to become Precure because they don't necessarily have as much trauma in their life or as many things holding them back. But at the same time, you'd assume the characters who have had to struggle more and who have gone through more adversity in their life would kind of be rewarded for that by, being able to be a Precure without having to go through this extra hurdle. I don't know, maybe that implication is the reason as to why they don't normally do this. Because it does almost seem a little bit unfair that Homare is the one who has to get specifically personally challenged, whereas Hana and Saya kind of just get to be a Precure for free. So as for next episode? Well, despite what happened this episode, it doesn't seem like Hana is willing to give up on Hamare just yet, and that's probably for the best, because of course she is going to be proven right, and Hamare is going to transform next episode. I am really interested, and also kind of a little bit concerned over how they're going to resolve the whole issue of Homare essentially having post-traumatic stress and having to deal with her own fears. Because this is a very heavy issue, and they could very easily resolve it in a kind of anticlimactic way through kind of, the power of friendship or some kind of really indeterminate thing that's not exactly that realistic. It feels like it's a lot easier to write a believable complication than writing a believable conclusion, especially if the complication is this heavy and this interesting as it was this episode. So I really hope next episode is going to be good and they don't drop the ball on this whole character arc. So that was Hugtto Precure episode 4. I mean, I was very much looking forward to this episode and it actually surpassed my expectations on top of that. It basically had everything. Great animation, really cool fight scenes, kind of actually heavy topics, and actual kind of subtlety in dealing with those heavy topics, and actually mixing up the formula to give us the surprisingly bittersweet ending leading up to the next episode. It's definitely the strongest character debut episode that we've seen in Precure for probably quite a while. And I think this is going to be one of those episodes that's going to be legitimately memorable even once the season is over. So I'm really glad I got to experience it. The only issue I might have is if this whole subplot is resolved in a somewhat convenient and kind of unrealistic manner, and well, I definitely hope they don't do that. But it also means that if next episode, if the conclusion is actually kind of really interesting and believable, Hamare might have one of the most interesting introductions and interesting character arcs in basically all of Precure, and that would be from only 2 episodes. That is really cool, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this is going to end. So this is Gabby signing out, and I'll see you all next week. Bye guys!